All right, we're in. We're in with that momentum, right? We're definitely in the house. Let me put what this is about. Let me add this to my screen. Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to add something here that should have been added already. I'll be right with you real quick. I don't want to do this later because I should be doing this before I even go online. I'm sorry, folks, but I'm going to do this. It will take me a minute. I told you we were attacking certain aspects, right? We were going to go in, and we are doing that. We went in on the structure of art and the and Paul's amphitheater or the audience theater, where they have events and they have whatever they do there besides what they do there, as we seen, and how the bizarre art of Jesus coming through an atomic explosion, not looking like a victorious religious aspect of a victorious savior in that one at all. Not at all. Not one iota. Boy, it does in this occultic world of hidden knowledge, right? In this lower realm of what's the upper, in the distortion of reality and the narrative control of them, the distorters. But then you turn on your gnosis and you wake up to your divine self and your divine light that you are, and you start decoding this and you start seeing it for what it really is. And you quit trying to polish turds. And you say, what do you mean by that? I had actually had a friend a long time ago in Christian esoterica. And one day he was talking, we had this discussion in this leadership meeting. And he had made a statement, because he would go up and share sometimes. And he had made a statement about indoctrination. And he's talking about, it was Christian esoterica. So it was coming out of the Christian traditional churches, which you find out that there'll be beliefs still held within certain people in that realm, as not everybody's on the same degree. But he says, trying to back up and prove doctrine and dogma is like polishing turds. That's what he said. That's what he said. I'll keep it there for a joke that I've heard with that. But anyways, I'm going to get to the business here. I told you I had a video to be shared, Bible Stories. Shout out to Bible Stories, because Bible Stories brings it. The first time Bible Stories came across me, I was like, it's Bible Stories. It's esoteric knowledge. And I just like shunned it. And then one day it came across and I looked at it, I go, oh. Then I looked at another video, oh. Then I looked at another one, whoa. I go, this gets to the core stuff. And they have been going in on systems in the depth and what things really are in certain places. We seen what we seen about that Vatican, right? And I call it the room, they call it Paul's, audience room or something, special room, but it's guided by a serpent with the eyes and the throne in the mouth, with Jesus rising out of an atomic bomb that don't look like a victorious savior, but looks like somebody rising out of hell that don't got no victory. And then the aspects of it when you see heads and skeleton heads around it, and you see it all with all this like exterior, almost like antennas, or not antennas, like something trying to grab you and pull you back down into the underworld. May I say so myself? What it looks like. But anyways, we are going to share. We are going to get into this video because it's not short. So let me stop my talking, which I can. We will get into some other things in the future when I want to share. But let's get into this. This is definitely deep. Blow your mind. Are you ready for it? Would be my question. It's called The Vatican, Peter, and the Throne. And you'll see on this, it's not called the throne. That's what I'm putting on mine. Right? That's what I'm putting on mine. But, so let's do this. I can't do it from there. Interesting. Okay. I can do it from here. And let's go. Well, we're looking at all
authority handed down from the apostle himself. Really? Because that thing looks less like a holy seat and more like the launch pad for a demonic coronation. Let's be blunt, this is not Christian art. This is occult architecture dressed up in religious drag. For towering doctors of the church hold the throne up like cosmic weightlifters, Ambrose, Augustine, Athanasius, and John Chrysostom. Great, cool names. Legendary figures. But let's look at what they're actually doing here. They're props. Stage dressing for something much darker. Floating above the throne is a massive burst of golden light, with Putty, those little chubby baby angels, swirling around like drugged-up cherubs in a fever dream. And right in the center of all that chaos is the Holy Spirit, depicted as a dove trapped inside an oval window that might as well be a sun disk. Yeah, that's not just some pretty stained glass. That's a solar symbol. A literal representation of the ancient pagan sun deity. Welcome to the Catholic Church, where old gods get recycled with better PR.
Are you really going to miss this?
We do this training once a year.
There's
800,000 to 1 million people that'll join us, and it's an opportunity for you to absolutely.
And that chair? The actual throne? Most people have no clue what they're even looking at. It's an empty shell built around a decaying wooden seat rumored to date back to the first pope. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. In fact, that so-called relic has zero verifiable evidence linking it to Peter. None. The Vatican's own admission? The original chair was likely assembled centuries after Peter even died. But sure, let's call it holy and worship it like it descended from heaven. Dig into the iconography, don't just glaze over it, and you start to see the real language being spoken here. The chaotic flare of bronze. The twisting forms. The illusion of movement and drama and ecstasy. This is Bernini at his most manipulative. The man wasn't designing for devotion, he was designing for control. He knew how to hijack your senses and hit your subconscious. And this whole installation screams one thing: manufactured awe. It's not meant to elevate your soul. It's meant to overwhelm your critical thinking. Let's zoom out a bit. The entire structure is framed like a throne room, not for a humble fisherman from Galilee, but for a deity. And I'm not talking about Christ. Look at the symbolism, the elevation, the centrality, the rays of light beaming out like divine authority. This is the throne of a god. But who's God? Because when you compare this throne to depictions of the throne of Satan in apocalyptic literature, you start seeing parallels that no one wants to admit. Power, light, chaos, centralized worship. We're not talking about the Beatitudes here, we're talking about dominion. You want to go deeper? Fine. Let's talk Mithraism. Ancient Roman cult. Initiation-based. Secretive. And guess what? Mithras had a seat of authority, too. A cosmic throne surrounded by zodiacal figures and light symbolism. The early church didn't destroy those cults, they absorbed them. Bernini didn't invent the aesthetic here. He recycled it. The throne in St. Peter's isn't just a pretty piece of art, it's a Frankenstein construct made from the bones of dead gods. And the church sits on it like it's the foundation of all truth. Now let's address the elephant in the basilica. Why call it the chair of Peter if Peter never sat on it? Why build a monstrous golden altar to an invisible legacy? Because this isn't about Peter. It never was. It's about cementing power. It's about crafting an icon so overwhelming, so theologically untouchable, that no one dares question the legitimacy of the institution behind it. Oh, you doubt the Pope's authority? How dare you? Don't you see the glory of the throne? That's the scam. The throne doesn't prove the truth of Peter's legacy, it's designed to silence dissent. And if you think I'm just blowing smoke, look at the history of papal power. Every time a pope speaks ex cathedra, from the chair, it's considered infallible. Yeah, that's right. That ridiculous oversized art piece justifies the idea that one man's words are literally above questioning. That's not spirituality. That's mind control. That's political theater with incense. And before some Vatican apologist jumps in with, but it's symbolic. Yeah, no kidding. Symbols matter. That's the point. Especially when they're this massive, this central, this loaded with unspoken meaning. You don't spend decades constructing something like this unless it serves a purpose beyond the decorative. And that purpose is clear, authority. Undeniable, untouchable, divine-sounding authority. Whether the source is actually divine or not doesn't matter, perception is the real weapon here. So ask yourself, if a chair becomes holy because they say Peter sat on it, and the building becomes sacred because they say Peter was buried under it, and the entire power structure rests on that assumption, what happens if the assumption is wrong? You can't say it. You're not allowed. The entire world religion would collapse under its own weight. And they know that. That's why the throne is gold. That's why the lighting is designed to hit your emotions before your logic. That's why you're told to revere it, not question it. Let's cut through the incense cloud and talk about the real foundation of St. Peter's Basilica. Not the faith. Not Peter. The dirt. The bones. The bedrock. You've been told it's sacred. But when you actually dig, literally and historically, what you find is a pagan necropolis and a temple complex that predates Christianity by centuries. The Vatican didn't just pick a nice spot for their central shrine. They hijacked a site already pulsing with spiritual power, power that didn't belong to the Christian God. Go look at the documentation from the 1940s excavations beneath the basilica.
Nothing makes me angrier when I get home from a long day and I just want to relax and watch YouTube, and then boom, you get hit with those really long, unskippable ads.
They found tombs. Pagan tombs. Full-on Greco-Roman burial chambers. You're not standing on holy ground, you're standing on a city of the dead. A pagan city of the dead. And right there, buried beneath the sacred altar, is what they call the Trophy of Gaius. It's a structure the church insists marks the burial site of Peter. Except the bones found there weren't even identified as his. For years, they were stored in boxes. No labels. No inscriptions. Just bones. Later, they pulled some random fragments from a wall niche and declared them Peter's. That's the level of science we're dealing with, reverse-engineered sainthood. And don't get distracted by the pious language about building a church where Peter died. Constantine's motivation wasn't divine, it was imperial. He wanted to unite a collapsing empire under one universal religion, and he needed a monument powerful enough to anchor that agenda. So he didn't build on fresh land. He took over a spot already loaded with esoteric charge. The Vatican Hill wasn't empty countryside. It was home to shrines, altars, and burial temples, some dedicated to Mithras, others to Cybele, and more we're not even allowed to study fully. The Vatican literally bulldozed sacred pagan sites to pour the concrete of Catholic supremacy. They didn't erase the old gods. They paved over them. Layered Christian iconography right on top like wallpaper over bloodstains. The entire structure is a merger between imperial Rome and its spiritual legacy. And that legacy is not Christian in origin. It's solar, astral, and ritualistic. The obelisk in the square? That thing is from Heliopolis, Egypt, a sun cult city. They didn't just place it there for aesthetics. They moved it, intact, from its original pagan position and planted it right in front of the basilica. That's not architecture. That's a spiritual power grab. The Catholic Church wants you to think the basilica is pure, untouched by paganism. But its DNA tells a different story. The layout, the symbolism, the relic obsession, it's a Frankenstein religion built from the corpses of older cults. And the Vatican is proud of it. They give tours. They show off the crypts. But they carefully edit the context. You'll see sarcophagi with pagan gods. You'll see altars to Saturn, reliefs of Venus, remnants of Etruscan magic systems. But the narrative is always, this was before us. No, it wasn't. It's still there. It never left. Ever wonder why the church resists open academic access to those underground levels? Because letting independent archaeologists inside would blow the lid off centuries of curated mythology. The Vatican's entire legitimacy depends on the sanctity of that location.
Wow.
So they gatekeep. They publish their own findings. They edit the narrative before it reaches the public. And they slap a holy label on bones and rocks that should have gone to a museum. Let's be real, Constantine didn't get baptized until he was dying. He spent most of his life as a sun-worshipping emperor who treated Christ like a political mascot.
Come on now.
He didn't build St. Peter's to honor a fisherman. He built it to override centuries of Roman gods and replace them with a central deity who served empire, not truth. The basilica wasn't the start of Christianity's rise, it was the start of its imperial mutation. Even the name, St. Peter's Basilica, is misleading. Peter never built anything there. There's no gospel record of him claiming that hill. The name is branding. Corporate religious branding. And it worked. Billions of people now face that altar and believe they're praying where Peter once walked. But the structure beneath their feet says otherwise. It says this place belonged to the dead long before it belonged to the saved. Let's talk about the architecture. The basilica's dome was designed using golden ratios tied to celestial alignment. Not just beautiful design, intentional symbolic geometry. It's aligned not for prayer but for power. You're standing in a solar-coded engine built to harness reverence and convert it into institutional control. The light shafts, the central axis, the symmetry, this isn't spiritual inspiration. It's spiritual engineering. Even the cross at the top isn't exempt. It sits on a globe, an ancient pagan symbol of dominion. In fact, the entire basilica is a map of dominion. Over minds. Over souls. Over time. It doesn't represent the triumph of Christianity. It represents the absorption of every powerful symbol from every defeated cult. That's not faith. That's assimilation. You think they'd build the most important church in the world on a neutral site? No. They chose a battlefield. A spiritual battlefield. Because the Vatican has never just been a church. It's always been a throne room. A ritual center. A power node in the architecture of control. And everything beneath it, the bones.
I started All Nation Restoration to help people. Chase for Business is literally what it says in the name. It is Chase for Business, where I can find everything I need in one place. So we can help people get back to life.
Oh my God. Sorry, guys.
The bricks, the stolen gods, they're all still whispering. You've seen the Vatican crest. 2 keys crossed under a triple crown. Gold and silver. The keys of the kingdom. Sounds holy, right? That's the branding. That's the story they've packaged for 2,000 years. But once you decode the symbols, once you stop taking them at face value, it's clear this isn't about salvation. It's about access control. The Vatican didn't choose the imagery of keys to open the doors of heaven. They chose them to show who controls what gets locked, and more importantly, who gets shut out. The gold key represents divine authority, and the silver one is earthly power. They're bound together by a red cord, unity of the spiritual and temporal. That's the official interpretation. Here's the problem. That entire setup didn't come from Jesus. There's no passage in the Gospels where Christ hands anyone literal keys and says, "Here's your badge, you're the gatekeeper now." The whole doctrine comes from a single verse in Matthew, "I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven," a verse that, contextually, is ambiguous at best. But the Catholic Church turned it into a political doctrine, a legal weapon, and a visual stamp of total authority. The imagery of jewel keys goes way back before Christianity. You can trace it through Babylonian priesthoods, Mithraic orders, Roman cultic societies.
Come on now.
The idea of two keys as symbols of dual access, life and death, above and below, light and shadow, is ancient. And the Vatican adopted it, rebranded it, and sold it as holy. But anyone with a background in esotericism knows exactly what it means: control over both realms. That's not theology. That's sorcery. The symbolic claim that one institution gets to dictate the terms of access to both this world and the next. Now, take that symbol and pair it with history. During the medieval period, the Pope wielded the power of the keys to excommunicate kings, anoint emperors, and launch crusades. You think this was about heaven? This was about real-world dominion. The church wasn't a spiritual refuge. It was an empire. And those keys were the ultimate weapon. With them, the church claimed the exclusive right to forgive sins, to interpret scripture, to administer sacraments, to decide who was in and who was out. That's not religion. That's a security protocol with holy water sprinkled on top. Look at how this works psychologically. You're born. You sin. You're told you need access to heaven. But you can't go there on your own. Someone has the key. And guess what? It's not you. It's the clergy. It's the church.
Break it down.
It's the men who wear robes, speak Latin, and live behind marble gates. That's the trap. They created a system where your soul's freedom is never in your hands. You're permanently on probation, spiritually locked out unless you follow their script. Baptism. Confession. Communion. Pay. Obey. Repeat. It's access control masters religion. And the keys didn't stop at theology. They were weaponized in legal codes too. The concept of the papal bull carried the authority of the keys. The Pope could invalidate marriages, crown kings, seize land, and command armies. All backed by this supposed divine right to bind and loose. Don't skip over that phrase, to bind and to loose. That's the core of this whole system.
Yes.
It's not about unlocking heaven. It's about locking down control.
Yes.
Bind your actions. Loose your guilt. Bind your money. Loose your penance. It's transactional control dressed in sacred terms. You want proof the keys were never about spiritual liberation? Look at how they're displayed. Not in humility. Not as a symbol of service. But as a royal crest, plastered across flags, robes, walls, and rings.
Come on now.
This is not the posture of spiritual guidance. This is branding. This is power marketing. Every time you see that crest, it's not telling you about Jesus. It's telling you who runs the kingdom. Even the color symbolism tells the truth. Gold, the sun, divinity, ruling power. Silver, the moon, reflection, hidden knowledge. These aren't random artistic choices. They're ancient alchemical codes. The red cord that ties them, that's the path of blood. Sacrifice. Ritual.
What's we've been talking about.
Look into Rosicrucian texts, Hermetic diagrams, and Masonic symbolism, you'll find the same elements repeated over and over. The Vatican didn't invent these symbols. They inherited them, and they knew exactly what they meant. Let's talk about head coverings, the tiara, the mitre, the veils, every piece of ceremonial headgear in the Vatican arsenal. You've seen it all, the triple crown, the bishop's mitre, the cicchetto, the hooded robes during certain masses. You probably thought it's all just tradition, harmless pageantry.
Bring it, brother. Tell that truth.
Wrong. These aren't fashion choices. They're not just symbols of religious hierarchy. These are tools of psychological and ritual control. Every piece has esoteric origins, and the church doesn't just know it, they built their system around it.
Now.
This is the quickest way to clear out stuck poop.
I have to poop, but it feels stuck.
Get out of here.
Start with the papal tiara. 3 layers. 3 crowns. You've been told it represents the Pope's authority in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. That should raise red flags immediately. Under the earth? Since when does a spiritual leader need dominion over the underworld? That concept isn't biblical, it's imperial. In ancient times, triple crowns weren't worn by prophets or disciples. They were worn by kings, conquerors, and high priests of pagan temples. And now it sits on the head of a man claiming to represent Christ. The man who said, "My kingdom is not of this world." But they still made the Pope's crown out of solid gold and stacked it 3 levels high. Each layer representing a tier of control.
Wow.
Spirit, mind, body.
Good
Heaven,
stuff.
earth, hell. Doctrine,
And make
dogma,
sure this is
discipline.
underworld.
However you want to decode it, it's not humility. It's domination, top down, through and through. It's not an accident that during coronation rituals, the tiara isn't placed by God or even by the Pope himself. It's placed by another cardinal, establishing that this power is passed along hierarchically by man. This is bureaucracy in sacred disguise. Let's move to the mitre, the tall, pointed hat worn by bishops and popes during ceremonies. It's said to represent the tongues of fire from Pentecost.
That's a joke.
But when you actually examine the shape and historical precedent, you'll see it's a direct lift from the headgear of the ancient priests of Dagon, the fish god of the Philistines. Look it up. The Dagon priest's hat was shaped like a fish head with the mouth gaping open, and when seen from the side, the mitre matches it almost identically. Same vertical structure, same split top, same hollow interior. You're watching a fertility cult remixed for modern religion. Even the Latin root of mitre traces to mitra, the headband of pagan priests in Greece. This was a mark of initiation into mystery schools, not a symbol of spiritual servanthood. You put this on your head when you were inducted into a system of hidden knowledge, ritual hierarchy, and enforced secrecy. Sound familiar?
Come on.
And then there's the cicchetto, the small skull cap worn by clergy from bishops to the Pope himself. The explanation you will hear is that it keeps the head warm, or is a token of humility. But in esoteric circles, the head covering serves a different purpose, containment. In ancient ritual magic, covering the crown chakra symbolized the sealing of spiritual energy, the restriction of divine transmission, and the redirection of willpower toward institutional channels. In other words, it disconnects the individual from universal energy and reconnects them to hierarchy. Don't brush this off as overinterpretation. The Vatican is the most symbolically calculated institution in modern history. Everything means something. Everything is precise. You think they just copied pagan headwear by coincidence?
Exactly.
These are scholars, ritualists, Jesuits, master manipulators. They know exactly what every fold of every garment does psychologically to both the wearer and the observer. You walk into a cathedral and see a man wearing a fish hat, sitting under a golden dome, holding a scepter. You're not being led to God, you're being visually conditioned to obey. And the veil? Let's not pretend that's about modesty. When nuns or clergy veil themselves, it's part of an ancient archetype of cloaking power, of transforming the human into the symbol. Once the veil goes on, you're not supposed to see the individual. You're supposed to see the institution. The body disappears. The hierarchy speaks. That's how cults function. That's how initiatory religions always operated. The veil isn't humility. It's erasure. Erasure of identity, of independent will, of dissent. Even the materials used matter. Silk, gold thread, ivory, jewels. These garments are not made for poverty, they're crafted for spectacle, for elevation. Every piece of it reinforces the same thing. You are looking at someone closer to God than you. Someone who gets to speak for God, interpret God, mediate God. It's theater, yes, but it's theater with teeth. Because when you dress someone like a deity, people treat them like one. You think it's a coincidence that the Pope wears white while all his subordinates wear darker robes. It's a visual hierarchy. Light on top. Obedience below. You think it's a coincidence bishops wear purple, the color of imperial Rome. Or that cardinals wear red, symbolizing blood and martyrdom, but also control, sacrifice, and ancient power in alchemical systems.
To start a podcast with Riverside, all you need is a concept and a way to record it. Here's how it works.
There's nothing random here. This is not clothing. It's armor. It's programming. It's encoded messaging, reinforced over centuries, generation after generation, until no one remembers where the symbols came from, only that they feel sacred. And that's the goal, to make the feeling of authority
Deception
so overwhelming, so untouchable,
core.
that nobody stops to ask why the men of God are dressed like the kings of Babylon.
Yeah.
Let's deal with the so-called burial of the Apostle Peter, because it's one of the biggest institutional assumptions that the Vatican has used to build an entire empire of spiritual authority. You've heard the claim over and over that Peter, the rock of the church, was martyred in Rome, crucified upside down, and buried directly beneath the altar of St. Peter's Basilica. That claim is not just the basis for the church's location, it's the cornerstone of papal succession, apostolic continuity, and the infallibility myth. So how solid is the evidence? Spoiler, it's not solid. It's propaganda wrapped in marble. Start with the primary sources. There's no direct scriptural or eyewitness account that Peter ever made it to Rome. The New Testament doesn't place him there, and early Christian writings only mention it ambiguously, decades after his death. The earliest document that suggests Peter was in Rome is from around 150 AD, nearly a century after he supposedly died. That's not historical documentation. That's hearsay turned into dogma. Then there's the actual excavation. In the 1940s, under Pope Pius XII, the Vatican authorized a secret archaeological dig beneath the basilica. And of course, they packaged it as a sacred mission. What they found was a necropolis filled with tombs from various centuries, many pagan. Then they pointed to one wall, known as the graffiti wall, which had the name Peter scrawled in Greek. That's the big smoking gun? A name on a wall in a city where Peter was a common name? That's supposed to justify 2,000 years of spiritual hierarchy? The bones? Let's talk about the bones. The Vatican announced in the 1960s that they had found the remains of St. Peter. But here's the detail they buried. The bones weren't even found in the original tomb. They were discovered in a box, wrapped in purple cloth with gold thread, in a different section of the necropolis. And they weren't even intact. They were fragmentary. Skull missing. Feet missing. Probably because he was crucified upside down, they say, because we just accept that as fact now. There's no physical proof of that claim, only tradition passed down and repeated until it became untouchable. Then came the carbon dating. Or rather, the refusal to allow proper independent carbon dating. Why? Because the church doesn't want a scientific process contradicting its sacred narrative.
Yeah, well, show them they're liars.
Every test and every interpretation has been done internally, by hand-picked experts operating under direct Vatican oversight. This isn't investigation, it's damage control. Even the so-called Trophy of Gaius, the structure that supposedly marks Peter's grave, is questionable. The only reason it's called that is because of a fragment of a 2nd century text that refers to a monument to the apostles on Vatican Hill. Not a tomb. Not a body. A monument. In other words, symbolic, not literal. The rest was assumed by later clerics who had every political reason to anchor their authority to Peter being buried exactly there. Let's remember why this is also important to them. If Peter wasn't buried there, then the Vatican loses its physical link to apostolic power. If Peter wasn't even in Rome, the Roman Church's claim to be the seat of Christian truth collapses. And if the Pope isn't the direct successor to Peter, then the entire hierarchy built on that idea becomes a farce. That's the scale of what's at stake. That's why they can't afford to admit any uncertainty. They can't allow open access to independent scholars. They can't entertain serious academic debate. The narrative has to stay airtight. Because if people start asking real questions about the bones under the basilica, they'll start asking questions about the gold above it too. The altar, the throne, the keys, the tiara, the robes, the rituals. It's all connected to this one foundational story, that Peter died there, was buried there, and passed on his authority through an unbroken line to the men who sit on that throne today. But when you take that narrative apart, piece by piece, what's left? A few bone fragments of unknown origin.
Exactly.
A name scribbled on a wall. Centuries of repetition. That's the real foundation under the Vatican. Not divine certainty, strategic ambiguity, locked in by fear, tradition, and a refusal to let go of power. You think people would be outraged if the bones turned out to be someone else's? No. They'd be told it doesn't matter. That it's symbolic.
Yes.
That Peter is spiritually present. Because once the institution loses control of the literal, they retreat into metaphor. And metaphor is impossible to disprove.
Urinate excessively, feel extreme fatigue, or have blurred vision due to diabetes. Place this under your tongue.
That's the game. Keep the narrative vague enough that it can't be directly challenged, but emotionally potent enough that no one wants to. Let's get into the uncomfortable truth about Paul, the man most Christians quote more than Jesus himself. And that's not an exaggeration. Go into any modern church, and you'll hear more about Paul's letters than the actual teachings of Christ. Why? Because Paul didn't just write letters. He rewrote the entire foundation of early Christianity. And the Vatican knows it. They built an entire theological structure on Paul, not because he was the most faithful disciple, but because he was the most institutionally useful. Paul wasn't one of the original 12. He never walked with Jesus. He never heard him teach. He claimed a vision on a road, alone, with no witnesses, and then positioned himself as the new voice of divine revelation. And somehow, that was enough to override the people who actually knew Jesus in the flesh. Let's look at the facts. Paul was a Pharisee, a Roman citizen, fluent in the legal and philosophical systems of both Jewish and imperial structures. That alone should have raised red flags. He wasn't some poor fisherman risking everything to follow a revolutionary rabbi. He was an educated enforcer, originally hunting Christians down before flipping sides. And the story we've been told? He saw a light, heard a voice, and suddenly transformed into the church's #1 apostle. But here's the issue: the Jesus Paul preaches is radically different from the Jesus of the Gospels. Paul's Jesus isn't focused on the kingdom of God on earth, on justice, on freeing the oppressed. Paul's Jesus is cosmic, abstract, and conveniently supports obedience, hierarchy, and salvation through faith alone. That version works a lot better for an empire than the one who flips tables and calls out corrupt priests. Now read Paul's letters again, this time with that lens. They're not accounts of Jesus' life. They're theological manifestos. They don't talk about what Jesus did. They define what Jesus means. That's where the entire church structure gets its legitimacy. Not from Jesus' own words, but from Paul's reinterpretation of them. He introduces original sin as a core problem. He turns crucifixion into a blood payment. He shifts the focus from collective liberation to individual guilt. These weren't Christ's teachings. These were systems of control packaged in Scripture. And the most revealing part? Paul constantly attacks the original apostles. He undermines Peter. He challenges James. He says in Galatians that his gospel didn't come from men, but by revelation. That's code for, I don't answer to the people who actually follow Jesus. Paul creates a parallel authority. And the early church accepted it, not because it was more truthful, but because it was more scalable.
I'm going to skip some of this a little bit ahead.
A theology
some of this I don't necessarily
his letters.
agree with.
And direct connection to the divine.
I do see some of what he's
but
saying.
Leave Paul in, and suddenly you need priests, rituals.
And I could see that with some of that. You would see that because some of it does make sense. A couple things he said, I do see that he did. But a lot of what he said was spiritual revelation knowledge. That would be gnosis. It does have a connection to gnosis. Now, bringing in structure and this, I see, because it really gets away from, it really does get away, but he amplifies that Christ is in you, which to me is truth, right? For me, it does.
Feel divine. This isn't a house of prayer. It's a fortress of power. Then you walk into the Paul VI audience hall and see the infamous resurrection sculpture by Pericle Fazani.
Perfect. Just like
and if you've got even half your neurons firing, you immediately recognize something's wrong. This isn't a depiction of Christ triumphant. This is something else entirely. The figure exploding out of twisted bronze doesn't radiate peace. It radiates chaos. His arms are out like a broken marionette, his face half skull, half serpent. The backdrop looks like nuclear hell, complete with ridges and sinews resembling demonic wings. And yet this is where the Pope gives weekly addresses. Right in front of a sculpture that looks like it belongs in the throne room of a dark god. That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
That's visual evidence. That's high-budget symbolism. Fazani said the statue shows Christ rising from a nuclear crater in the Garden of Gethsemane. Nuclear crater? That's not Christian mythology. That's a twisted reinterpretation of death and rebirth using apocalyptic energy and technocratic imagery. And it gets worse. The hall itself, from aerial views, looks like a serpent's head.
Hey, it's Tony Robbins. You know, I've had the privilege of the last 48 years to be obsessed by a question. That question.
The windows are the eyes. The stage is the mouth. The scales are embedded in the ceiling. This is not hidden. This is overt. They made a building that worshippers sit in every week, shaped like a damn reptile. Why? Because they know people don't look up. They don't question sacred ground. They're too busy being obedient. But for those who actually observe, the message is loud and clear. You're not in the presence of divine love.
No.
You're inside the belly of a symbolic predator. This isn't isolated. The Vatican crest is loaded with esoteric geometry. The rituals they perform, the incense, the Latin chants, the robes, the processions, they don't trace back to Christ. They trace back to Rome, to Babylon, to Egypt. The Vatican didn't escape those systems. It absorbed them. And the final result is a spiritual machine so well designed that even its prisoners think they're free. You've been told the Vatican is the center of truth, the voice of God on earth, the seat of divine authority. But when you decode the symbols, follow the architecture, and trace the power, what you find is the exact opposite. This is not the throne of Peter. This is the throne of something much older, much darker, and much more calculated. The Vatican is the greatest spiritual illusion ever built, and billions are kneeling to a system that doesn't even pretend to hide the snake under the robe anymore. They just expect you to stay too blind to see it. And that's where I'll leave it. I want to say thank you. Really. You didn't have to be here, but you chose to stay. That means you're not asleep. You're not.
That is something else, right? When you start look, I'm going to stop the share, see where we're at time. Yeah, we will get off here in a second, but very powerful, very long video, very powerful. His videos their videos which I even recognize the voice in all the videos, which could be somebody, but also it's kind of AI-ish, and to be honest, not kind of, it is. But not that it didn't bring truth. The little bit I disagreed with was Paul. I personally don't see the story as literal at all, of even that aspect of the story. I don't see it as literal. I see it as an allegory of you being that Christ. And Christ is the oil that goes down your spinal cord. So that aspect of it, but usually really get deep and good. And there was a lot of good stuff here. Little bit shook me up with the Paul thing, because Paul was definitely, I revelated off Paul's it way more than Peter's. Peter, I've seen a lot of Jewish law. I mean, but we were also led that way. But I do see the other aspects he was saying does make sense, bringing in a higher rank and higher officials. But he does concentrate within when the others didn't. So some I'm kind of here and there. It doesn't matter. The truth's within you, whether we disagree on some things. And this is the thing. We're in a day where if you can't disagree with somebody, they don't agree with you, they're your enemy, right? Because we're on different degrees of understanding. But that stuff was really good, breaking down and showing you again the structure that I did on my last video, and I was hoping they have some pictures of the serpent, which he didn't, but we'll be at it again. We had a video not long ago about connected to the Saturnalia, Saturn, and then the technology, because I see a lot of technology in these ancient buildings, even the Vatican, how it's built on these things, how we have all these pyramids. This is ancient technology made in buildings where their harmonics are better, and where things are done spiritually, energetically, to get things, extract things, and also cause mind control or even truth. The thing is, you can take the truth in the deepest levels, highest levels, and use it for the betterment of the oneness of everybody, or you can use it for flat what we seen's happening in the story of the last 2 days, which is not new. Power, control, lies, and like you said, I'm glad he was breaking down everything that the priests wore. When you understand that, you should be going, I see what this place is. But like you said, man, you're just blind and just believe anything because you were told that you need to be a believer, that you're worthless, no good sinner, crap on a cracker. Just be honest. But let's get into this one. This will end, and I'm glad you guys were here. This is an awesome video. Thank you, Bible Stories. Appreciate it. We will have some more new good stuff coming. You guys have a great day, and I appreciate you all, and all you newbies, keep on coming.